This is what I'll be working on today. When I was mowing the yard the other day, I noticed there was a lot of free travel in the steering gear, and it steadily got worse, and I thought maybe a tooth had broken off the steering gear. But that turned out not to be the case. There was a well broken on the steering arm. My standard disclaimer in the videos I do is that I do things my way, and it's worked well for me, and you may have a different way of doing things, and that's fine if it works for you. This video will apply to almost all Sears riding lawnmowers, but could easily apply to other makes as well. After you have removed the gas tank by removing the two screws and lifting it up out of the way, this is what you'll see. The red arrow shows the steering arm, and that steering arm weld has broken on the shaft that runs through the steering gear. There are 4 bolts that hold this steering gear to the frame, and they're not easily accessible. You need to jack it up a little bit on the front and lower the deck as much as you can, and you can reach it with a 1/2 inch or 13 millimeter socket, short extension, and ratchet. I have a 3/8 air ratchet that I hardly ever use, but boy did it really come in handy here. If you have one, use it. It'll make it go a lot easier. Removing the deck from underneath the mower will make this go a lot easier too. I chose not to do that. The steering link, the drag link in automotive terms, bolts to the bottom of this steering arm where the red arrow is underneath, and you will have to remove that as well. Now you can easily see the well that has been broken on the end of this steering shaft where the steering arm is welded to the steering shaft. You can also see the front 2 bolts that holds the bracket that holds the steering gear. Now there's 2 more that you can't see to the rear. The drag link or steering link from the front end to the steering box arm has a ball stud, and the ball stud bolts through the hole that you see here in the steering arm. It's best to remove that. It goes a lot easier if you have a ratchet box end, and you'll need to hold the ball stud with an open end wrench. If you're not accustomed to working with wrenches in places where you can't easily see or reach, you might want to drop this deck. For a beginner, it would go a whole lot easier. This steering wheel hub cover just snaps off, and then you can see the big washer with the retaining bolt for the steering wheel. The steering wheel fits over this aluminum adapter hub. As you see in this photo of the aluminum adapter hub, it has 2 flat spots, one on each side of the hole for the steering shaft. And here you see the steering wheel aluminum hub adapter, and the steering shaft adapter that has 2 flat spots on it on both sides of the bolt hole. This plastic steering column cover just snaps onto the dash. Remove that. Remove the bolts you see here through the steering shaft adapter extension. Now you'll see the steering shaft adapter extension. Now here is where a lifetime experience of working on all kinds of things, cars, mowers, chainsaws, really pays off. You cannot easily pull this extension straight off the steering shaft because the metal around the bolt hole will be indented into the steering shaft, and you just can't pull it straight off. Part of that steering gear is made out of plastic, so don't use a slide hammer, don't force it. Instead, do this. It'll go a lot easier. Down close to the steering gear, use a pair of vise grips on the steering shaft. Then with a wrench on the top of this steering adapter, where the two flats are, use a wrench on that and turn it. And turn it until it is 90 degrees away from the steering shaft bolt holes that you see here. Now when you've turned it 90 degrees, you'll have the solid part of the steering shaft, not the holes, but the solid part of the shaft. Then take a hammer and tap around the bolt holes on this adapter, and it will smooth the holes out to where you can pull the adapter straight off. This is what happens when you're 74 years old. Your skin is worn out, tears very easily. Not just simple scrapes as I would get when I was younger, but tears the skin. Now this is a severe tear. It took it right down to the white part of the skin, several layers. So this is what it looked like peeled back. I did this by trying to remove the 4 steering box bolts underneath the mower. So after a little first aid, I had to use an old sock to cover that up to where I wouldn't damage it again. Now the box is removed and you can see the 4 bolt holes that retains the steering box. When I say steering box, I mean gear. I'm referring to cars when I say steering box. And here's one view of the steering gear laid out on the bench. Now you can see where the wheel was broken, and it wasn't much of a wheel to start with. It wasn't completely around the shaft. Now you may just want to wheel that shaft and not go any further, but I wanted to take the gear apart and inspect it, and also there was a little bit too much play between the 2 gears, the steering shaft gear and the sector gear. Notice that to the right on this gear you'll see a bushing that has a flat spot on it, and that bracket has a flat place in it, and so the bushing slides through there in a certain way and not allowed to turn. Now let me tell you something I've learned the hard way from experience. You need to mark these parts if you're going to take this gear apart by making some scribe lines on the parts so you'll know how they go when you put it back together. Okay, listen carefully because this is critical. You see the splines on the steering shaft on the right side of this photo next to the steering arm. What that means, because this doesn't have a master spline, is that this steering arm can go into the steering gear any location. And so it's critical that you either take a photo of this gear before you take it apart, or you mark that steering arm in relation to the steering gear. If you fail to do that, what you're going to end up with is, after you put the box back in, it's going to steer a whole lot one way, but not much the other. And that's bad. It needs to be centered. So carefully note the position of this steering arm before you pull the shaft out of the steering gear. Now in my case, I could tell where the wheel was broken, and I could tell where the arm was supposed to be on the shaft that I was about to weld. Here are the parts in order that they go. To the far left you can see the edge of the C-clip that holds the shaft and gear through the bracket. Next to that are the shims on the end to take out the play. Then you have the bracket, then the steering gear, then the shaft goes through it all, and you see the yellow arrows where the C-clips go. There is a bushing right against the steering arm on the right hand side, and that bushing of course turns, and there's a flat spot on that where it goes through the steering bracket. I failed to show that in this photo. I removed some of the play from the steering gear by adding another shim to the 3 shims you see on the left, and I just happened to have a valve spring shim that worked perfectly for that. Now you can see the broken weld that I'm getting ready to weld after I cleaned it real good with a wire brush. I welded that with a stick welder at 130 amps. I held it vertical with a fire brick on edge. Maybe this is a little overkill, but after greasing the steering gear, I covered it with a plastic bag loosely where it won't get caught between the gears, and then loosely attached a wire tie to the top to where the steering shaft can freely turn within the bag. I just wanted to keep grease clean, keep the dirt and debris away from this steering gear. I did punch a couple of small holes at the bottom of this bag so if any water should get in it, it'll drain out. Now this upper plastic bushing that screws to the dash of the mower, that has to go on first before your steering shaft extender adapter is bolted on. Now there was too much play in this and I could have bought a new bushing, but instead I had a little sleeve, a little piece of conduit that I sliced with a hacksaw and used that to make a bushing for this plastic steering bushing. In the previous photo you'll see a worm drive clamp around that bushing to keep it from sliding down the shaft, and that bushing is greased. The reason I sliced that conduit lengthways is it was a little too small to use. It wouldn't slide right over the steering shaft, so that let it do so. Videos of various car repairs and other repairs are just one thing I do. The main thing I do now is Lenoir and Caldwell County History on Facebook, where I restore thousands of photos of downtown Lenoir, North Carolina and Caldwell County. And I'm also on our local museum board of directors. Thanks for watching this video.